Before I begin today's story, I just want to ask everybody, if you see ads in the middle of this story, please comment down below. I have the mid-roll ads turned off, but I've been getting comments that some people have been seeing them. And I know since June 12th of this year, YouTube has really been trying to push mid-roll ads on everybody. So anyway, this one's written by Kevin G. This is a fun one. I hope you enjoy it. Kevin G is part of my team that I use to write the stories. My name is Kelly, and a couple of years ago, I think I might have killed someone. You see, I used to work as a late shift driver for, well, let's just say it was a very, very popular home grocery delivery service. There was a massive pay differential for doing night deliveries, and when I started with this company, I really needed money because I'd recently been evicted. I was living with a friend and wanted to get as much cash as I possibly could in a short time, so I could get a new place sooner rather than later. And despite the late hours, I took the job and the shift, and I found myself driving a delivery van up to the most random places in the middle of the night. I spent the better part of 4 months driving all over West Virginia and Virginia, dropping off groceries and other packages in the middle of the night. You have to know that the 3:30 to 7 a.m. shift is a very unpopular one, and for good reason. It's dark, it's lonely, it's scary, and it's pretty damn dangerous, which is why the company I worked for paid a hefty shift differential for those who drove it. At first, it was pretty intimidating, because you're just walking up to a house in a heavily wooded area and hoping that you don't scare the crap out of someone. And more than once, I came up to a house that didn't have much in the way of exterior lighting, and had to use my flashlight to actually find the doorbell, or even the stairs. There were also issues with people misunderstanding designated delivery times, or just plain forgetting about the delivery altogether. One time I went to a house that had a motion alarm that blared out into the night, and it scared the hell out of me. I was standing there with grocery bags in my hands as a woman came to the door with a rifle. I wound up spending almost a half an hour trying to convince her that I was just delivering the groceries that she ordered. Cops were called, and I was almost arrested because no one believed that I was actually delivering that early. But then she suddenly remembered and apologized. Man, I almost quit that night, but like I said, I needed the money. Honestly though, most of the time, it was pretty pleasant, because there was almost no traffic to speak of, and most of the people who I was delivering to were expecting me, and were extremely grateful and generous with the tips. It was also mostly peaceful, especially near the stores when I was picking up the groceries. I could also stop and get a fun coffee at the convenience store, like a toffee latte or whatever. Now I must admit, I sometimes miss the work, but I will probably never go back to that company, or even delivery driving after what had happened. I should say that this was back during the pandemic, and kind of right in the middle of lockdown, so there weren't a lot of people around at all. Even for being 4 a.m, most places seemed deserted, even the loading area where I got my deliveries from. When I went to get the order, Sandy, the attendant that I usually worked with, came out of the door to the store alone, wearing a mask and pushing a cart filled with only a handful of bags. We talked briefly for a minute, exchanging pleasantries, and then she pushed the cart over to my car and let me unload it. She kept staring at the address on the receipt and shaking her head, and when I was done with a handful of bags, I asked her what was wrong. Sandy explained that the address didn't make any sense, and that it led out into the middle of nowhere. We talked about it for a bit, and I mentioned that it wasn't a lot of stuff, and she agreed, and mentioned that it was just enough to meet the minimum requirement for a delivery. We both thought the order was suspicious, and I actually wanted to cancel my acceptance of it, but once I picked it up, I couldn't. Sandy even wanted to take the order back, but once it was in my van, we were stuck. I figured that I'd just try to deliver it, and if there were any issues, I'd just say I couldn't find the place and eat the cost. So I got into my van and I used my GPS to find the address. As Sandy had said, the place was, well, still technically within my route radius, kind of on the outskirts of town and not near much of anything to speak of. I looked into the back seat to see what kind of products had been ordered, and it looked like a smattering of random stuff, but some of it was necessities, like toilet paper. A lot of people I delivered to were elderly or disabled persons, and I felt guilty thinking about an older or disabled person having to go without what they needed. And so, I reluctantly turned the key to the ignition and pulled out of the parking lot to head to the location and just get it over with. I resolved that if I felt off at all, I would just claim that it was undeliverable and I'd bail. But I wanted to at least try. I know that probably sounds dumb to some of you, but my work ethic and doing a good job is very important to me, regardless of who I work for. The drive through town was pleasant, as it often had been, and I have to say that I do love the way the streetlights look at night when there's no one around. I loved even more when those lights disappeared as I reached the edge of town proper and entered the forested residential district. This was where most of my deliveries took me, and it was always kind of, thrilling, I guess. It was beautiful and peaceful, but also spooky, and I liked it, especially when I eventually learned of all the homes and the faces of the people that I delivered to. As I drove, it started to rain a little, and soon I could no longer see mailboxes on the side of the road or porch lights through the trees. Everything suddenly became a darkened, endless forest. It was nuts. It was like someone just shut off the lights. I was paranoid as all hell, and not just from the idea that something might get me, but like deer or other animals just jumping out in front of the van, or even people walking on the road. It all became really nerve-wracking all of a sudden, and I hated it. It took me almost an hour to make it to the road, which supposedly led to this place, and when I finally got there, I almost missed the turnoff. I had to slow down suddenly, which I hate doing, especially in the rain, and back up, but instead of making the turn, I just pulled over to collect myself, because I still wasn't sure that I was going to make this delivery. The first thing I did was check the GPS and make sure I was where I was supposed to be. The address on the receipt said 5 Biddle Lane, but the GPS called it Access Road B. I thought for a second that I just put the address in wrong or something, but when I entered it again, it gave me the same location. I looked outside to see if I could spot a road sign, and actually did, right ahead of me. But between the rain and the dark, I couldn't read it from the inside of the van. I kind of remember being pissed off at this point because I genuinely felt like I was in a horror movie. I grabbed my flashlight and tried to aim it through the window to see the sign, but as I already knew it would, the light reflected off the inside of the windshield. I had to get out of the van on this old highway, and I wasn't happy about it at all. Now, for the record, while I'm all about love, peace, and doing right by others, I'm also a pragmatist who was raised by a Marine. My dad used to use that old Wild West quote a lot, the one about Sam Colt making all men equal. When I was 15, he took me out to the range and taught me how to use his 1911, which I would like to mention was also his pride and joy. And I believed in my heart that he loved that gun more than he did me. That is until the day I turned 17, and he gave it to me. And from that day to this, I've rarely left the house without it. I reached over to my purse, pulled out my gun, and tucked it into the pocket of my hoodie. Then opened the door to the van and stepped out. It was April, but a chilly night, and the minute I got out of the heated vehicle, I wanted back in. I quickly shined my flashlight up at the road sign, and sure enough, it read, Biddle Lane. But the sign was really old and made out of wood, and not like someone just made this with some pallets and a Sharpie, but old, and the letters were in a fancy, elegant print. Just as I was coming to admire the sign, I heard a noise in the trees just off to my left. It said, "Screw it," and I got back into the van. I turned my flashlight off, locked the doors, and just sat there for a minute, trying to dry off and warm up. The sound was probably just an animal, and I felt like an idiot, but I also wasn't taking any chances. I sat there staring at the sign, which was now even more difficult to see through the rain of the windshield, just hating life in that moment. I'm sure you've been there before. I almost said screw it and just turned around, but my nagging conscience kept pecking at me, and I kept seeing this poor old lady who didn't have what she needed because I was a coward. And so I put the van into gear and turned down Biddle Lane. Now, to those that are listening to this, I want you to know that I look back on this exact moment as one of the stupidest things that I've ever done. Like, seriously, as I sit and I think about this now, I'm questioning how I'm even alive. But I'm still not even sure I was ever in any danger at all. That's kind of the point. Anyway, there's no need for you to stress over my dumbness. I'm well aware of it in hindsight. The rain abated almost as soon as I turned onto the road, and I attributed this to the heavily canopied forest ceiling above me. The limbs of the trees were holding the rain back well enough for me to see where I was going at least. I only hoped that it would last, because I still couldn't see much out of my dripping windshield. As I guided the van down Biddle Lane and passed under the boughs of the dense woods, I was surprised at how well maintained the roadway was. I had fully expected a rough, bumpy go up a gravel drive at best, and a slog through the mud at worst, but the ride was smooth, if odd. The tires made an odd sound as I went along, and I wondered at first if I was driving over something. But when it continued in a uniform manner, I realized that it just must be the road itself. I spotted a really bright green sign that simply read 2, and I realized that I must have missed 1 somewhere behind me. I slowed down a bit, trying to pay a little more attention, and noted that the sign had the same, honestly really gorgeous script printed on it that the road sign had. The only difference was that this sign looked new, or rather, it looked well maintained. But I got the feeling that all the signs were old, really old. As I pulled past 2 Biddle Lane, I looked up, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Up a short path from Biddle Lane was this huge mansion, all lit up on the inside, like someone was having a huge party. I didn't see any other cars, but the place looked like it was very active. I was completely thrown because, as I've stated, I had no idea there were even houses out this way. I got a bit of a sobering thought there, and I wondered if this was like a super rich person's private estate. Like maybe someone had bought up what was once a small neighborhood or unincorporated community and built themselves a hideaway. This led me to 2 realizations, each of which had its own merits. The first being that this whole thing might be some kind of illuminated sacrifice lure. The second was that, if it wasn't, given the time of night and the randomness of the order, they might tip very, very well. I kept going down Biddle Lane past 3 and then past 4, and I was looking for 5 when I pulled the van to a sudden squeaky stop as something small and oddly colored ran in front of me. It was orange, purple, and blue, and at first I thought it might have been some kind of southern tropical bird, because I don't know any other animals that are of that color. Then I wondered if it was a kid wearing colorful clothing, and my heart sank. I didn't think that I'd hit anything, at least not that I'd felt, but I worried that I might have clipped something and not realized it. I parked the van, made sure I had my gun and flashlight, then got out of the van again to see what it had been. When I rounded to the front of the vehicle, there was nothing there. I shined my flashlight all around and into the trees on either side of the road, but I didn't see anything even remotely colorful. There was nothing around at all. I was also surprised to find that it had stopped raining completely, which was odd because I hadn't noticed at all. But I realized that I'd been seeing pretty clearly since I'd gotten on the road. That's when I noticed the road itself, as my flashlight's illumination danced over it and realized what all the steady odd sound was. The road was made completely out of mortared cobblestone of various hues, sizes, and shapes, but was formed perfectly onto the road. I'd never seen anything like it before, except when I took a trip to Philly. It was beautiful, and I found myself drawn in by it, suddenly wanting to know more about who lived there. I heard something from the woods off to the right and shined my flashlight that way, but only saw endless trees. I decided that I'd convinced myself that I hadn't hit anything, so I got back into my car and kept driving. After a little ways, probably only a few blocks honestly, I spotted another beautifully crafted address sign. It was red and printed in gold letters on it was 5 Biddle Lane, written out in flowing script. I stopped the car and looked for a driveway, but all I could see was the narrow footpath, which was also made of mortared cobblestone. I remember smirking as when I saw the quaint, old-looking house made of oak logs and stone. I shook my head at the oddness of it all and used my phone to send a message to the customer that their order had arrived, then grabbed the handful of bags from the back. After securing the car and making sure I had my gear, 'cause I'm not that stupid, I walked up the path toward the strange but beautiful-looking house. It was so bizarre because it looked like something out of Lord of the Rings, or like a fable from a bygone age, but it clearly had electricity, because just like the mansion that I'd seen earlier, all of the lights were on, and there seemed to be a party going on inside. It seemed almost cheery. I walked up to the front door, bags in hand, and noticed that there seemed to be quite a few people inside, all drinking and chatting, but I could only see silhouettes. I could also hear music playing, but it was live, acoustic, and not any song that I'd ever heard before. It was like there was this whole tavern scene from some Renaissance fair going on inside. I put the bags down on the step and rang the doorbell, wondering if I was going to be invited in for a drink, and genuinely considering accepted if I was. I was just so curious about all of it. Who were these people, and how could I not have heard that this place was here, and all this time? How could Sandy not have known? She'd been living in town her entire life. Why were the signs so odd and old? It was all so intriguing and unsettling at the same time, and it just made me more and more curious. Now, no one came to the door, so I rang the bell again and noticed something really odd about the door in the porch. The door didn't seem to have hinges or seams where the door met the frame. It was all smooth and seemed more like a decoration. The doorknob was also really high on the door, almost at eye level with me, and I'm not short. I realized suddenly that the door wasn't a door. It was meant to look like a door, but it wasn't a door. It was like some kind of facade, which meant that no matter how many times I pushed that doorbell, no one was going to open the door because, like I had said, it wasn't a door. I set the bags down on the pointless welcome mat and reached into my pocket for my gun and turned on my heel to leave. I had no idea what all of this meant, but there were clearly no handicapped or elderly people here. Or if there were, they weren't living alone, and someone else could get the groceries from the porch for them. As I stepped off the porch and got to the yard, when I heard someone call out from the side of the house, saying something like, "Oh, you're here." Now, this was followed by an extremely unusual, and to me, frightening noise that sounded at once like a man with a deep voice laughing, a dog whimpering, and teeth chattering. The combination of disparate noises, seemingly from the same source, just set me off, and I spun in the direction from which I'd heard it and almost screamed when I saw what was there. Out on the side yard came what at first looked like a very, very tall man, dressed in what I thought was a clown outfit. He wore orange overalls and an extremely bright yellow shirt. His hair was bright, a fire engine red actually, and I could see that in the dark. It was so bright, but it was also covered by a strange, conical, pointed blue hat. If his choice of outfit at 3:30 in the morning wasn't bizarre enough, his face was just terrifying. His eyes were covered over with skin, like he'd been blind and not had eyes all of his life. And he stuck his tongue out, which was impossibly long, and wriggled it in every direction, making this odd, creepy, mumbling noise. He looked absolutely insane and inhuman, and I remember being almost as amazed by his existence, and I was afraid. Almost. What was the most frightening thing about this guy, though, wasn't actually how he looked, but how he moved. He stepped out into the yard and squatted low, but kept his back straight and waved his hands around in the air manically as he came out of the side yard. He scared the living shit out of me, so badly that I reacted to him without consciously thinking. What happened next is probably my greatest regret in life, outside of making that initial turn at all, because my life would have just been better if I'd never found this place. Without so much as a yelp, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my dad's 1911, and shot that weirdo 3 times, dead center of mass. He dropped right there. He went very still, and at the same time, at least, I was very sure that I had killed him. I panicked then because I thought for a moment that I'd not seen what I thought I'd saw, and just shot a strangely dressed person because I was scared. I moved closer to him, keeping my gun in my right hand but pointed at the ground. The closer I got to this person, the more sure I was that shooting was the correct course of action. The guy's clothes were weird as hell and looked like the kind of thing that was brand new 100 years ago. His eyes were covered with skin, but still bulging out, so not like they'd been removed, but like the skin had grown over them. His tongue stretched out of his mouth well over 6 inches and was purple, like bright grimace purple. It was at this point that I noticed his hands for the first time, which were covered in weird thorny bumps all over the outside. Like, what the hell? Now, I fully expected the music inside to stop and someone from the party to come out and investigate, to have the police called, and to go to prison for murder, or even have someone from inside try to attack me, but nothing happened. The party kept going, and seemed to even get a bit louder. The music kept playing, the night birds called, and this thing bled out all over its own lawn. Literally nothing happened. You see, it didn't feel like no one had even heard this shot. It felt more like either they heard it and didn't care, or there was no one there to hear it in the first place. I got the strangest feeling of my whole life then, and decided that I'd had enough. I didn't check his pulse. I didn't try to get anyone's attention. I didn't even call the cops. I just got back into my van, turned around, and booted it back the way I'd come. On the way off of Biddle Lane, I saw the same or some other colorful creature, like the one I'd seen, but I ignored it this time. I passed the mansion again, and that party still seemed to be in full swing as well, but I just kept on driving. I didn't gun the engine, so I didn't accidentally kill anyone else, but I didn't stop for anything. Not until I got to the highway. The second I hit the main road, the heavens opened, and it was suddenly pouring rain. I couldn't believe being under the trees had stopped the rain that much, but it was like a monsoon everywhere else but Biddle Lane. I wanted to floor all the way back to town, but the rain was making it even more difficult to see now than when I'd first come out that way. It was like it hadn't stopped raining at all. When I finally got back to town, I drove straight to the store I delivered from and honked the horn until Sandy came out. I told her I needed to call the police, and I needed her as a witness of the delivery. When the police arrived, I gave a statement and explained everything in about as much detail as I've given here. They told me they needed to confiscate my gun, and I turned it over without a fuss. As I told the police what had happened, they nodded a lot, except when I got to the parts about the cobblestone road, the street signs, and the grand houses. The cops writing down my statement actually stopped and asked me to repeat what I'd said when I mentioned the big mansion. When I did, both of them gave each other a look, and I think they thought I was high, or something. The police explained that the area was abandoned and was often used by drug addicts and other criminals for all kinds of stuff. They told me that I was likely being lured out there to be robbed or trafficked, and that I was very lucky. They let me call my dad, and it was only then that I finally cried. I bawled my eyes out to him over the phone. I just thought that my life was over and that I was going to prison for the rest of it. Then came the weirdest part of all of this, as if it wasn't weird enough. When the officers who were sent out to check on my story called over the radio, they claimed to have found nothing. Biddle Lane, or as they called it, Access Road B, was nothing but a muddy track that led to some really old condemned houses. Their vehicles were SUVs, and they claimed they couldn't get more than 40 feet down the road before blocked by heavy overgrowth, and that there was no way I could have gone farther in a delivery van. I was a little pissed at first, because I thought that maybe they'd gone to the wrong road, and I used my phone to show where I had gone with GPS, but that was exactly where the officers were. It was so confusing and disorienting. They asked me if I'd taken any drugs that evening, and I told them that I didn't do drugs, but that I might have been dosed somehow, which they also thought could have been the case. So I submitted to a test, but it came up negative, which was both a relief and very, very concerning. If I was drugged somehow, then all of this at least made some sense. But if I wasn't, then it all happened to me, but I couldn't explain any of it. It felt like I was going crazy. But I knew that I wasn't because I had the receipt, and Sandy confirmed that the order had been to that area, though now it was suddenly mysteriously canceled. The officers taking the statement told me that it was almost pointless to search that area right now, and that they'd wait for the rain to stop and the sun to come up. They also stated that, regardless of what occurred, I'd clearly been through a serious ordeal, and that they would escort me home. I agreed and went home to try and sleep, but I had terrible nightmares all night. The next day, I was awakened by the officer who'd taken my statement, knocking on my door. He explained that he'd come to return my firearm and share what he had found. He explained that they had gone further into the area on foot that morning, and he thought that they found the house I was talking about, but it was long abandoned and not suitable to live in, let alone have a party in. He told me that while they didn't find the groceries that I delivered sitting on the porch, they did find 3 .45 caliber casings just off of the porch, where I'd said that I'd fire from. Outside of that, they didn't find anything else to corroborate my story. There was no body, there was no blood, and no evidence of a crime whatsoever. The officer told me that while he couldn't explain my story, he believed me, and that he wanted me to know that whatever happened out in those woods, he didn't think that I had hurt anyone. I greatly appreciated this because, for a minute there, I had just thought I'd gone nuts. He told me that he'd feel the same way, which is why he wanted to reassure me, but that I should probably try and put it out of my mind. He also told me to stay away from that area, and that the store has been warned to not accept orders from there anymore. After he left, I got into my own car and drove directly to that turnoff. Now, I know, a cop just told me not to do exactly that, but I had to see for myself. When I drove past the turnoff and saw that there was no cobblestone road nor a sign for Biddle Lane, just a gross, muddy path, I felt like throwing up. And once I got a significant distance from there, I pulled over and I did just that. I quit my job that same day and moved out the very next. I told my landlord to just keep my security deposit, and I moved back in with my parents for a month because I was so scared and just wanted to be around my dad. He was very comforting and reassuring, but mostly just glad I was okay and proud that I defended myself. Dad had kept telling me exactly what the officer had, that I hadn't hurt anyone, and to try and forget that any of that had occurred, because reliving it wouldn't help at all. I tried and still try to take their words to heart. I tried to put it all out of my mind because if there was no blood and no bullets, then no one had been hurt, right? If they never recovered a body, then I hadn't killed anyone. And that's at least what I tell myself every morning. When I wake up and I see the face of the man I shot in the mirror. The man who apparently didn't even exist.